Alright, all that's left now is to fill in the smaller branches of the brachial plexus. A bit of bad news is that the smaller branches can come out of the roots, the trunks, and the cords. Alright? Not the divisions, the other three. Alright? Obviously, not just the. Ideally, obviously, it would be just the cords, but like, we don't make the rules here, right? So I'll tell you guys, it's actually really easy to memorize this because there are patterns which I'll point out as we go through it, okay? Okay, so let's start off with the beginning. The branches of the roots. There are actually two smaller branches of the roots. They are the branches of C5, just C5, and the branch of that is made up of C5, C6, and C7. Again, this is made of the roots, straight up, okay? I want you guys to memorize the branches of the root separately and the branches of the rest separately. I'll tell you guys why in a second, okay? So the upper trunk gives two smaller branches. Alright, so why you wanna memorize it this way is because I want you guys to imagine the trunks containing a certain amount of neurons, alright? Okay, so the upper trunk is formed of two roots, C5 and C6, right? The lower trunk is formed of two roots, C8 and T1. The middle trunk is only formed of C7. What does that mean? The middle trunk contains a lot less neurons than the upper and the lower trunks, okay? Now the upper trunk gives two smaller divisions, so what's left of the upper trunk is very little and in comparison to the lower trunk. Now what's left of okay, so let's just say this. What's left of the upper trunk is less, and what's in the middle trunk is less, and the lower trunk is a lot. Okay, so less, a lot. Okay, so now let's get into the divisions. These divisions, now let's compare them with each other, okay? Now let's start off with the divisions of the lower trunk, alright? So the lower trunk didn't give any small branches, and it's formed of two roots. Now let's go up to the middle trunk, okay, and compare it to the lower trunk. It's only formed of the root C7, so obviously it's lacking, and so the anterior division and the posterior divisions are lacking in comparison to these divisions, okay? Or let's look at the upper trunk. It already gave two smaller branches, so it's already lacking in comparison to the lower trunk, and the anterior and posterior divisions are lacking in comparison to the anterior and posterior divisions of the lower trunk, so they are lacking. Okay, so now let's look at the chords. The lateral chord is formed of two lacking divisions, the anterior division of the upper trunk and the anterior division of the middle trunk. It's formed of two lacking divisions, and it can only give a small amount of branches. Smaller branches can only actually give only one smaller branch, okay, because it's formed of the anterior divisions that are lacking. Now the posterior chord is formed of the posterior division of the upper trunk and the posterior divisions of the middle trunk, which are lacking, but it's joined with the posterior division of the lower trunk, which is not lacking. It contains a good amount of neurons, and so this can give a good amount of branches, can actually give 3 branches. So the medial chord is formed of the anterior division of the lower trunk, which is not lacking, and it can form 3 smaller branches. Okay, so now finally all that's left is to write down the names of the smaller branches. Good news is that there are patterns or there are observations you can that will help you memorize what are the names of the branches or what muscles do they supply. For example, so the nerves from the roots supply the medial border of the scapula, C5. The nerve from C5 supplies the posterior surface of the medial border of the scapula. It is called the dorsal scapular nerve, or the nerve to rhomboids. It supplies the rhomboides major, minor, and the levator scapulae. The nerve that is made by C5, C6, and C7 roots supplies the muscle that is attached to the anterior surface of the medial border of the scapula, which is called serratus anterior. The nerve is called nerve to serratus anterior, or the long thoracic. Like I said, the nerves from the roots supply the muscles that are attached to the medial border of the scapula, both the dorsal surface and the anterior surface. The smaller branches from the trunks, what do they supply? Both the muscles that they supply are outside of the axilla. So one on the anterior surface and one on the posterior surface. The first muscle is subclavius, by the nerve to subclavius. The second muscle, it is outside the axilla posteriorly. It is called it is the supraspinatus and infraspinatus, and they are supplied by the suprascapular nerve. Finally, the branches of the chords. You wanna memorize the branches of the lateral cord and the medial cord together because they are similar. The lateral cord gives the lateral pectoral nerve, which supplies only the pectoralis major muscle. It pierces through the clavipectoral fascia and supplies the pectoralis major muscle only. The medial cord gives the medial pectoral nerve. The medial pectoral nerve supplies both pectoralis major and minor. It pierces through the pectoralis minor to reach pectoralis major muscle. It also gives two cutaneous branches, the medial cutaneous branch of the arm and the forearm. They supply sensory function to the medial sides of the medial surfaces of the arm and the forearm. There is actually a good drawing, well, there are good drawings out there on the internet. If you want to know exactly what region these nerves supply, you can just look them up. Finally, the branches of the posterior cord, they supply the muscles that make the posterior border of the axilla. If you remember, the posterior border of the axilla is made subscapularis muscle from above, and the latissimus dorsi and the teres major from below. Or the latissimus dorsi muscle is supplied by the nerve to latissimus dorsi, which is called thoracodorsal nerve. So actually the subscapularis is supplied by both the other two nerves. They are called the upper and lower subscapular nerves. So the other two nerves are called the upper subscapular nerve and the lower subscapular nerves. They both supply the subscapularis. The upper supplies the upper part and the lower supplies the lower part. But the lower subscapular nerve also supplies the lower part of the subscapularis, and it also supplies the teres major muscle. With that, all that completes the brachial plexus. But the very, very, very last thing is, for example, if I ask you what roots does the musculocutaneous nerve contain, you would go back in the plexus. Oh, it's made of this anterior division, this anterior division. It's made of this trunk and this trunk. So it's made of the roots C5, C6, and C7. And that's actually true for most nerves of the plexus. But the nerves of the posterior cord are a little bit different, except the radial nerve. The radial nerve works this way. The rest works different. So the axillary nerve. So actually, all the nerves of the posterior cord, they can be traced back to all three trunks, and they contain all the roots, right? And that's actually true for the radial nerve. But like the rest of the nerves are different. They could contain all the roots, but actually what is observed is that they contain nerves from only a few of them, not all of them. So the axillary nerves The axillary nerve contains roots from only C5 and C6, and the upper and lower subscapular nerves also contain roots from only C5 and C6. However, the thoracodorsal nerve or the nerve to latissimus dorsi contains roots from C6, C7, and C8. Now, again, this does make absolute sense just because it could contain nerves from all the roots, but it just happened, or it is observed that it only contains nerves from these specific roots. The rest of the nerves of the plexus, however, are as you would expect them, except another exception, the ulnar nerve. The ulnar nerve, you would expect it's only made of the anterior division of the lower. You'd only expect it containing nerves from the roots C8 and T1. However, the ulnar nerves, besides C8 and T1, it contains neurons from the root C7. So how does that happen? So it is said that the ulnar nerve gets neurons from the root C7 either from the median nerve or from the lateral cord of the brachial plexus.